here, not your ridiculous homeowners association. I quit!
At 6:12 in the morning, I watched a man in a bright safety vest hammer a sign into the ground at the entrance of my private road like he owned the place. The sign was big, shiny, and brand new. It said, HOA controlled road, no parking fines enforced. My stomach dropped. I don't live in an HOA. I never agreed to any HOA rules. And most importantly, that road was on my deed. It was private property. I stood there in my kitchen, coffee getting cold, staring at my security monitor, thinking, no way, this is real. But it was real, and it was only the beginning. I moved out here because I wanted peace. Not the kind of peace where you never see people, but the kind where nobody tells you what color your mailbox must be. My house sits back from the main street, reached by a short private road that ends at a few homes, including mine. It's the kind of road that feels like a long driveway shared by neighbors. We all know each other. We wave, we help each other with snow, and we mind our own business. The private road existed long before the newer neighborhood nearby was built. That neighborhood had an HOA. I knew that. But it wasn't my HOA, and their rules weren't my rules. A few years after I moved in, construction started behind the trees. The empty land turned into a neat subdivision with matching roofs, tidy lawns, and little HOA flags at the entrance. At first, I didn't care. People should live how they want. But I noticed something quickly. Some of their residents started using our private road as a shortcut. It saved them a couple minutes getting to the main road, especially during rush hour. I didn't love it, but I understood traffic happens. Still, a private road is not a public road, and it definitely isn't an HOA road. I figured if it ever became a problem, I'd deal with it the normal way. Calm conversations and clear boundaries. A white envelope showed up in my mailbox with a clean, printed label and a return address from the HOA. Inside was a letter that sounded polite but felt strange. It said the HOA had updated community traffic plans and would be installing appropriate signage for safety and compliance. It also mentioned enforcement and fines for people who violate posted rules. My eyes locked on one sentence. This will include the private access road adjacent to our community. Adjacent? Sure. Included? No. The letter acted like my road was part of their neighborhood. I reread it 3 times, waiting for it to make sense. But it didn't. That night, I pulled out my house papers like I was studying for an exam. I looked at my deed, my closing documents, and the survey from when I bought the property. Everything was clear. The road was private, and my property included part ownership in it, along with a small group of neighbors. The HOA had no mention anywhere. No agreements, no easements giving them control, nothing. I even checked the county GIS map online just to double-check what I already knew. I wasn't imagining it. The HOA had no legal reason to control the road. So why were they acting like they could? That question kept me awake. 2 days later, those signs showed up. Not one sign. 3. One at the entrance, one halfway down, and one near the turn by my mailbox. They looked official, like something you'd see in a planned community. Reflective, clean, and confident. HOA-controlled road. I walked outside and stood by it, reading it like it might change. It didn't. A neighbor drove by slowly and stopped. He rolled down his window and asked, "Did you approve this?" I said, "Absolutely not." He just shook his head and said, "This is going to get messy." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a power move. I called the number on the HOA letter. A woman answered and introduced herself as the property manager. I kept my voice steady. I said, "Hi, I'm calling because your HOA installed signs on my private road. You need to remove them." There was a pause. And then she said something that made my jaw tighten. Our board reviewed the area and determined it's within our enforcement zone for safety. I told her, it's not within your zone. It's private property owned by the road residents. Please remove the signs. She responded with that corporate tone. I can bring your concerns to the board, but the signs will remain for now. For now. Like she was doing me a favor. The next day, I got an email from someone who called himself the HOA president. The message was short and firm. He claimed the HOA had a responsibility to manage traffic that impacts community safety. He said the signs were necessary because residents had complained about speeding and parking. Then he added a line that felt like a threat. Non-compliance may result in fines and towing, as permitted by HOA policy. I stared at that sentence, thinking, towing. On a road you don't own. It sounded ridiculous, but I knew how these things go. If someone acts confident enough, people assume they're right. And that's how control spreads one bold sign at a time. I didn't want drama, but I also wasn't going to lose my rights because someone printed a nice sign. So I started documenting everything. I saved emails, took pictures of the signs, and wrote down dates and times. Then I upgraded my cameras. I already had a door camera. But now I added a camera pointed toward the road entrance and another aimed at the sign closest to my mailbox. If the HOA wanted to play games, I wanted facts. Clear facts. I didn't plan to yell or argue in the street. I planned to let evidence do the talking. In my experience, nothing cuts through noise like a simple video that shows exactly what happened. Once the signs went up, the mood on our road changed. Neighbors started texting each other. One neighbor asked, "Can they really fine us?" Another asked, "What if they tow my truck?" A retired couple down the road said they felt stressed because they didn't want confrontation. But they also didn't want strangers controlling where they could park. We had always handled things like adults if a car blocked someone. We knocked and talked. But an HOA is different. An HOA sends letters. They escalate. They talk about enforcement. They bring a whole system with them. My neighbors asked what I planned to do. I told them I'm going to handle it calmly, legally, and with proof. A week later, an HOA compliance notice was taped to a neighbor's car. It said the vehicle was in violation of community parking rules and warned of towing if it happened again. My neighbor doesn't live in their community. His car was parked on our side, where we always park sometimes. That was the moment the HOA crossed from annoying into unacceptable. It wasn't just signs anymore. It was action. I called the property manager again and said, "Your HOA is putting notices on our cars. Stop immediately." She replied, "Our board believes this road is under our jurisdiction." Jurisdiction, like they were the government. I told her, "If you continue, I will involve the county and law enforcement," she said. You can do what you feel you need to do. Cold, confident. Wrong, even though I already had a survey. I hired a surveyor to mark the boundaries clearly. I wanted zero doubt. A week later, the surveyor placed small boundary markers and provided a clean, updated map. It clearly showed the private road's ownership and where the HOA property began and ended. The HOA didn't own a single inch of our road. Not one. I made copies for myself and my neighbors. I also printed the county parcel map and highlighted the lines like a teacher grading homework. I wasn't doing this to be dramatic. I was doing it because I've learned a hard lesson in life. People who want control will pretend confusion until you show them a bright, clear line. One evening, right before dinner, a man knocked on my door. He introduced himself as a member of the HOA board. He smiled like we were old friends. He said, "We're just trying to keep the area safe." I replied, "Safety is fine. But your HOA is not in charge of our private road." He asked if we could work out an arrangement. That's when I realized something. They weren't confused. They were negotiating. He talked about speeding, kids playing, and liability. Then he suggested we allow the HOA to manage the road to reduce risk. Said no. If there's a safety issue, we can address it as road owners. You can't take control. His smile faded a bit, and he said, we'll have to proceed as the board decides. Then he walked away. 2 more signs appeared. One said private road, HOA, rules enforced. Another had a list. No parking, 15 miles per hour. No commercial vehicles, no soliciting. I actually laughed when I saw no soliciting because the HOA itself was now the biggest solicitor on the road. It felt like they were trying to overwhelm us with authority. The more signs they put up, the more official it looked to outsiders. And that was the danger. Delivery drivers, guests, even emergency services might hesitate if signs are confusing. Plus, some of the HOA residents started acting like they owned the road, pointing at signs as they drove by like they were proud. It was turning into a silent takeover. Then the real proof arrived. One night, my phone alerted me, motion detected at the road entrance. I opened the camera feed and saw 2 people with headlamps unloading a sign from a truck. They weren't county workers. They weren't contractors in uniform. One of them looked like the same board member who came to my door. They were placing the sign carefully, like they'd done it before. They weren't asking permission. They were planting a flag. I saved the video instantly, backed it up to a hard drive, and emailed a copy to myself. If anyone later claimed the signs were already there, I had the truth recorded from multiple angles. At that moment, I stopped feeling confused and started feeling focused. Before going legal, I gave them one last chance. I sent a clear email to the HOA president with the survey attached. I wrote, "This private road is not owned by your HOA. Your signs are placed on private property without permission. Remove all signs within 48 hours. Stop placing notices on vehicles. If you do not comply, I will pursue all available legal and law enforcement options." I kept it professional. No insults. No yelling. Just facts and a deadline. I even offered a meeting with my neighbors so we could talk about safety concerns in a reasonable way. I wanted to show I wasn't against safety, was against trespass and fake authority. His response came the next day. "Our attorney is reviewing. Signs will remain pending review." Pending review. Another way of saying, we're not moving. A week later, I got a letter that claimed to be from the HOA's attorney. It was written in intimidating language, full of phrases like common interest, public safety, and implied access. It hinted that because HOA residents use the road, the HOA had some kind of right to regulate it. That's not how private property works. Using something doesn't give you control over it. If that were true, anyone could walk into your yard enough times and start making rules. The letter also warned that interfering with HOA signage could be considered vandalism. That line made me angry, because they were calling it vandalism if I removed signs from my own property. It was upside down. I didn't want to spend thousands on a long fight, but I also didn't want to be bullied. So I paid for 1 hour with a local property attorney. I brought the deed, the survey, the HOA letters, and screenshots from my camera. The lawyer looked through everything and said, "You're on solid ground. This is your private road. They cannot enforce HOA rules on it. They also cannot place signs on property they don't own." He advised me not to touch the signs yet, because they might try to twist the story. Instead, he suggested I send a formal letter demanding removal, and if they refused, involve the county and law enforcement for trespassing and illegal signage. He said, "Your best weapon is calm documentation." That matched my plan perfectly. I called the county office that handles roads and signage. I explained the situation. Private road, HOA installed signs claiming control. The person I spoke with said something important. If signs are placed in a way that looks like official traffic control, It can create safety confusion and legal issues, especially if the signs resemble public enforcement signs. She told me to document the sign locations and take photos from the driver's view. She also advised me to contact the sheriff's office if I believed trespassing was happening or if the HOA was harassing residents. That was the first time I felt like someone outside our road understood the seriousness. It wasn't just petty neighbor drama. Fake authority signs can cause real problems. A few days later, delivery driver stopped near the entrance, confused by the signs. He parked for less than 2 minutes to confirm the address. I watched from my window as an HOA resident approached him and pointed at the nitrogen monoxide parking fine sign, lecturing him like a security guard. The driver looked irritated and embarrassed. He left quickly. That might sound small, but it matters. Deliveries, guests, repair workers, people need to feel safe and clear about where they can go. The HOA signs were turning our road into a weird conflict zone. I realized if they kept doing this, someone could get into an argument, or worse. That's when I decided it's time to involve the sheriff. I called the non-emergency number. I didn't exaggerate. I said, I have a private road, and an HOA is installing signs on it and placing enforcement notices on vehicles. I have documentation and video of the installation. I'd like an officer to advise on trespassing and removal. The dispatcher asked calm questions and took the details. She told me a deputy could come out later that afternoon. I felt nervous, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because involving law enforcement always raises the stakes. Still, I knew I needed a neutral authority to tell the HOA what they refused to hear from me. They don't own the road, and they can't act like they do. While waiting for the deputy, I walked the road and took more photos. I measured how close the signs were to the traveled path. I wrote down the exact wording on each sign. I also printed copies of the deed and survey to hand over. My neighbors came out too. Some were angry. Some were anxious. Everyone was tired of feeling like strangers were making rules on our land. A neighbor asked if we should remove the signs ourselves. I said, not yet. Let's do this the right way. In my mind, this was like chess, not boxing. If we moved too fast, the HOA would scream vandalism and play victim. If we stayed calm and let the sheriff see everything, the truth would be simple. The deputy pulled up in a marked vehicle and stepped out slowly, scanning the road like he was already sensing the tension. I introduced myself, explained that I was one of the road owners, and told him I had documents and video. He walked to the entrance sign and read it carefully. I could see his expression change. Not shocked, but clearly unimpressed. He asked, "This is a private road?" I said, "Yes, owned by the residents here, not the HOA." He nodded and asked if I had proof. I handed him the survey and the deed copy. He looked at them for a minute, then looked back at the sign like it had become even more ridiculous. He said, "Okay, let's talk about what's going on." I opened the video on my phone. The deputy watched quietly as the footage showed to people placing the sign at night. It was clear, steady, and time-stamped. You could see their faces when they turned toward the headlights. You could see the truck. You could see them positioning the sign with care like it was planned. The deputy asked, "Do you know who they are?" I said, "I believe one is on the HOA board." He came to my door. The deputy nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've seen this kind of behavior before. He said, "This is trespassing and unauthorized signage on private property." Hearing him say that out loud felt like someone opening a window in a stuffy room. Finally, the situation was being called what it was. The deputy looked at me and asked, "Do you want to press the issue criminally, or do you want them to simply remove the signs?" I didn't want anyone arrested over a sign. I wanted the behavior to stop. I said, "I want the signs removed and I want them to stop placing notices on our cars." He said, "All right." He then asked if I had any direct threats from the HOA. I showed him the letters mentioning fines and towing. The deputy raised his eyebrows. He said, "They can't tow from a road they don't control. If they try, call immediately." He also told me to keep recording everything. Then he said something that surprised me. "Let's see if we can resolve this right now." The deputy made a phone call from his vehicle. A few minutes later, he told me his supervisor wanted to come out. When the sheriff arrived, the atmosphere changed instantly. The sheriff was calm, but carried that natural authority you can feel without shouting. He walked the road entrance, read the sign, and asked me to explain from the beginning. I did, step by step. I kept my voice steady. I showed the documents, then the video. He watched the footage twice. Then he looked at the sign again and said plainly, "This doesn't belong here." He asked, "Do you have permission from the HOA to be on their property?" I said, "No, because I don't go on their property." He replied, "Right, and they don't have permission to put this on yours." The sheriff explained it in simple terms. A private HOA can make rules for its members, but it cannot enforce those rules on property it doesn't own. If the HOA believes it has a legal right to the road, it must handle that in civil court, not by posting signs and threatening residents. Until a court says otherwise, the road owners control the road. The sheriff also pointed out that signs implying enforcement and fines can mislead the public and create safety issues. He told me you did the right thing, calling instead of escalating. Then he turned toward the signs like they were an insult to common sense. He said, "We're going to remove these right now." I expected paperwork. I expected a warning. I did not expect what happened next. The sheriff and deputy walked to the entrance sign, checked how it was mounted, and began pulling it out. Not angrily, just firmly, like removing something that never should have been there. The sheriff told the deputy to document the removal. Then they moved to the next sign and did the same. My neighbors came out onto their porches. Someone whispered, "They're actually taking them down." I watched quietly, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. The sheriff wasn't debating the HOA. He wasn't negotiating. He was treating the signs as what they were, unauthorized objects placed on private property, and he was removing them immediately. My security cameras recorded the whole thing. Clear daylight footage of the sheriff and deputy removing the HOA signs from our private road. It was the kind of evidence you don't plan for, but are grateful to have. It showed that law enforcement recognized the signs as unauthorized. It showed the process was professional and calm. It also protected me, because if the HOA later claimed I removed them myself, I had proof I didn't. The sheriff even told me, "Keep this footage." That mattered. Because people who push control like this often try to rewrite the story afterward. But video doesn't care about their version. Video only shows what happened. And what happened was simple. The sheriff removed the HOAS signs from my private road. After the signs were removed, the sheriff asked if I wanted him to contact the HOA directly. I said yes. He stepped aside, made a call, and spoke in a low, firm voice. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough to understand the message. He stated the road was private and the signage was unauthorized. He warned them not to return to install signs again. He mentioned trespassing. He also told them that if they had a dispute, they should address it legally through proper channels, not by trying to enforce rules on non-members. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "If they come back and do this again, call us. Don't engage. Just call." That advice was gold. 2 days later, an email went out to the HOA residents. I saw it because one of their residents forwarded it to my neighbor, and my neighbor shared it with me. The email claimed the HOA had been forced to temporarily remove signage due to a dispute. Temporarily. Like it was still theirs to decide. It also suggested the road owners were being uncooperative about safety. That word against safety used like a shield to justify control. What the email did not mention was the sheriff. It did not mention trespassing. It did not mention the video. It was carefully written to make it sound like a normal disagreement. But something had changed now. The HOA knew we had proof. They knew the sheriff was involved. And they knew we weren't intimidated by letterhead. Soon after, the HOA president emailed me, asking for a friendly meeting to collaborate on shared concerns. The tone was different, less commanding, more polite. That's how it goes. When pressure doesn't work, they switch to diplomacy. I replied that I was open to discussing traffic concerns, but only with the understanding that the HOA has no authority over the road and cannot place signs or enforce rules on it. I also said any meeting should include road owners and be documented in writing. He responded with vague language about mutual interest. I could tell they still wanted to weigh in. They weren't asking to address a problem. They were looking for an opening to claim influence. I wasn't going to hand them that. Here's what bothered me most. If safety was truly the concern, they would have approached us first. They would have said, "Hey, can we talk about speed bumps or a stop sign?" Instead, they installed signs without permission and started threatening fines and towing. That isn't safety. That's control. Real safety is cooperative. Control is one-sided. Also, they didn't put up signs that said "Drive slowly, children at play." They put up signs that said HOA-controlled road and fines. Their focus was authority, not care. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. They were trying to expand the HOA beyond its borders. Maybe because they were used to telling people what to do. Maybe because they thought we were an easy target. But they picked the wrong road. After the sheriff removed the signs, we didn't just relax and forget it. We took smart, simple steps. We put up our own small, legal private road sign near the entrance, nothing fake. Nothing that looked like government enforcement, just a clear notice. We also agreed on basic road etiquette among ourselves. Slow speeds, no blocking driveways, and keeping a clear path for emergency vehicles. We didn't need an HOA to do that. We also shared camera coverage in case anyone tried to sneak back at night. No paranoia, preparedness. When people show you they'll cross boundaries, you don't pretend it didn't happen. You calmly reinforce the boundary and keep living your life. About a week later, motion alerts lit up my phone again. A vehicle rolled slowly near the entrance. 2 people got out and walked toward where the old sign had been. My camera captured them clearly. One held something long and narrow, like a signpost. They stood there for a moment, then noticed the new private road sign, and, I swear, it was like watching someone realize the chessboard had changed. They looked around, and one of them glanced directly toward my camera. Then they got back in their car and left. No sign went up that night. Maybe they remembered the sheriff's warning. Maybe they didn't want another recorded incident. Either way, the cameras did their job without a single word spoken. After that, things got quiet. No more notices on cars. No more threatening letters. No more surprise signs. The HOA residents still used the shortcut sometimes, but they drove slower. And fewer of them treated our road like it belonged to them. It felt like the air had cleared. I didn't feel triumphant in an angry way. I felt relieved. I had protected my property without screaming, without fighting in the street, and without doing anything reckless. And my neighbors felt it too. One of them said, "I can finally breathe again." That was the real win. Not embarrassing the HOA, not defeating anyone. Just restoring normal life and basic respect for boundaries. The cameras didn't just catch them in the act. The cameras made the truth undeniable. Without the footage, the HOA could have claimed, "We thought it was ours," or "Those signs were already there," or "We hired a contractor and didn't know." But video removes the fog. It showed who installed the signs, when they did it, and how intentional it was. It also showed the sheriff removing the signs, which mattered because it proved law enforcement treated the signs as unauthorized. In disputes like this, the loudest voice often tries to win. But evidence doesn't have a voice. It just exists. And when evidence is clear, the situation becomes simple. Even if people want to make it complicated, I learned that some HOAs don't stay in their lane. Not all, but some. And when they overreach, they rely on people feeling intimidated or confused. They use official-looking signs, legal-sounding words, and threats of fines to create fear. Many people comply just to avoid trouble. I also learned that calm action beats emotional reaction. Documentation beats arguments. And respectful firmness matters. I never insulted anyone. I never trespassed on their property. I never touched their cars. I focused on facts, the deed, the survey, the footage. And I asked the right people for help. If you're ever in a similar situation, don't let someone's confidence trick you into surrendering your rights. If an HOA or anyone tries to control your private road, start with 3 steps. First, check your deed and get a survey if needed. Don't rely on memory or rumor. Second, document everything: photos, letters, emails, timestamps. If legal in your area, use cameras that cover your property lines. Third, stay calm and use official channels: county offices for signage questions, and the sheriff's office for trespassing or harassment. Don't rush to remove things yourself if it could create a messy he said, she said situation. Let the evidence lead. Also, keep your neighbors in the loop. When everyone shares the same facts, it's harder for outsiders to divide people or pressure individuals quietly. Today, when I drive down that same private road, it looks normal again. No fake HOA-controlled signs. No threats. No random papers on windshields. Just a quiet stretch of road leading home. And yes, my cameras are still running. Not because I'm living in fear, but because I believe in protecting what's mine with facts, not fists. The whole situation could have turned into chaos. But it didn't. It ended with something simple and powerful: the truth, clearly documented, backed by the law, and handled calmly. The HOA tried to take control of a private road with signs and intimidation. The sheriff removed their signs immediately and camera. And that was the moment the road went back to what it always was: private, peaceful, and ours.